What does a good versus a bad behavioral answer actually sound like? In this video, we're going to dive right in, and I'm not going to tell you what answer I'm going to start with, but I think it will be pretty obvious as we dive in what is the better answer. And then at the end, we're just going to go really high level and discuss a few of the differences, a few of the reasons why one answer is better than the other. So let's discuss the setup. The setup is we're interviewing for a program manager of supply chain at Google. Our fake interviewer, as always, is Sue. And lastly, the question. The question is, tell me about when a project you were managing was running seriously behind schedule and what you did about it. So let's dive right into answer one. Sue, during the initial phases of our project we were working on, we had a good plan in place and we absolutely had some really good historical data to derive from previous campaigns. And while each year our numbers grew, we had created a really good repeatable process from a logistics and delivery plan perspective. And the good news was our stakeholders were on board and the key milestones and risks had been outlined in order to have success. The first month we really did focus in on that planning component. And then in the second month, we had fantastic success in the execution phase. We had about a 99% success rate. But in month three, and this was month three of 2020, COVID hit and we were scrambling. And much like everybody else, we were really worried about the supply chain because it was absolutely critical to our success. And we really didn't know what to do about it. And we got into a little bit of panic mode. And while we were discussing options, we weren't really getting anywhere. So I decided to go back to the drawing board and work on some solutions that might help. So I brought some solutions to the table. I gathered those critical stakeholders and we discussed my ideas. And what we established was one idea was pretty creative that we could move forward with. So we picked the option. And the option we picked was to go with Best Buy's Geek Squad to help deliver our phones, specifically delivering our phones so that they could ship them out to their customers. And we looked at the overall planning, we looked at the delivery, and we looked at the logistics. Then we reached out to leadership at Best Buy to see, hey, is this a valid plan? Is this something that they would even engage or be interested in? They agreed to our approach, and obviously some items needed to be worked out on the legal side. Then we rolled out our plan. We started by testing in California, and then once it was successful in California, we actually launched it nationwide. And the results were, ultimately, we still finished 2 weeks behind, but given the initial delays during COVID, this was actually a great result, and Apple awarded me with the Performance Award for the good work that I had done. Okay, let's move on to answer number two. We'll take the prompt from Sue and we'll restate the question. Jeff, tell me about a time when a project you were managing was running seriously behind schedule and what you did about it. Sue, this is an example from my time as a program manager in supply chain at Apple, specifically focused in our iPhone refurbished division. And our project was to get out our iPhone 10s to one of our major vendors in Best Buy. And we got seriously behind schedule when COVID hit. And by the end of April, we were already a month and a half behind. Let me tell you about the actions I took over the next 3 months to get this project turned around. The first action I needed to take was I needed to stop and research some alternatives. I did specifically a situational analysis and a gap analysis focused on our main challenge of getting the products to a critical vendor. And I came up with the idea to utilize Best Buy's Geek Squad as a delivery and logistics solution. I created a short 3-slide presentation and shared it with a few critical stakeholders, specifically my lead, my skip lead, and an expert in the delivery and logistics space. And everyone agreed that this approach was valid, but needed additional sign-off before pitching to Best Buy. And from there, I was part of a number of additional meetings working in partnership with legal. And once we agreed the idea was ready to pitch, then I reached out to the critical stakeholders at Best Buy to present the idea. I had some really high-level stakeholders from my organization, including my skip leads lead, one of our most important and critical senior counsels, and some other important members. And after some back and forth, along with expediting contracts, again, a big legal component here. We were able to get everything situated, and we had an agreement in place to use Best Buy's Geek Squad to help with actually getting these iPhones so that they could deliver them out to their customers. The next tricky part was execution. We needed to test that this solution would work, and we piloted it in the 3 biggest cities in California, in LA, San Diego, and San Jose. And before piloting, we actually partnered with our research team to create really strong surveys so that we could get instant results and see the results of these tests within 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, the results were clear. This was absolutely working with high customer satisfaction, not only from Best Buy, but Best Buy's customers. And so we had a plan to roll it out nationwide over the following 2 weeks. Later on in the year, in September of 2020, I had the opportunity to present all my findings and results to a leadership team, high-level deck that I went in via video again to present these results, and some opportunities to get more creative, specifically on the delivery and logistics side when working with third-party vendors. And the last step, of course, I documented all this information and shared it internally with all the critical stakeholders. The results were our program got back on track. We ended up having about 2 weeks of delays, but considering what all the challenges were during COVID, this was pretty great. We anticipated that we saved about $6 million overall in shipping costs by utilizing the Geek Squad. And not only did we help foster and build a stronger partnership with Best Buy in the process, we got some of their employees working that would not have been working because of the store closings. And I was fortunate enough to receive the Performance Award. And this is an award that one of only 3 people in the entire US receive on a yearly basis. And lastly, there was a little bit of repeatability here. This model was repeatable for some of the other third-party vendors that had transportation systems in place. Okay, let's go into the recap. Once you hear the second example, I think you can, or I hope you can hear the difference. Specifically, this will have your interviewer way more engaged. So let's go through each item at a very high level. The situation. The bad example, it just had no specificity and lingered on a lot of details that weren't important. It didn't get to presenting the critical details and answering the question that was being asked. And that is a critical pivot point in behavioral answers. Hear the question and start answering the question right away. So much of the context was not helpful and it was very vague. Now, in the good example, I was able to quickly establish credibility with my focus area, the specific type of project, and establish the timeline to solve for it. Just a few critical items that were very specific. Now, in the actions, the bad example introduced Best Buy, but it introduced it basically in the second action, and I had no context. And while some good details were provided, there was never a clear vision of what was being solved for. Whereas the good example clearly outlined the steps and gave some very critical and specific details, not every detail, but enough to get really attached, and took us through every single step of the process, didn't really skip anything from initial research and conversations to execution and testing to that ultimate presentation and documentation. Then as we get into the results, the bad example had no specificity in the results, and the good results provided tons of specificity and repeatability.